Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make your very own pot holder. This is a quick and easy tutorial and it makes a great gift for the holiday season. First, taking a pot holder that you already have, go ahead and trace it on some paper, adding about a 1-inch seam allowance all the way around. If you don't have a pot holder, you can just make a standard little rectangle about what size you want, adding your seam allowance. You're going to need to cut 2 pieces of fabric for this and 2 pieces of batting, heat resistant. Now we're going to go ahead and cut out this pattern piece. Now taking your fabric, I found these 1-yard seasonal fabric bundles up at Walmart. Really good deal for just a little bit of fabric that I needed. I found this fall turkey fabric perfect for Thanksgiving. Also, I had one with pumpkins. Go ahead and unfold all that. I'm going to keep mine folded in half so I can cut 2 pattern pieces. Now, if you have a directional pattern, make sure you're careful where you are laying your pattern piece. I specifically really wanted the turkey on the pot holder itself, so I had to move my pattern around to make sure that I have that turkey. With directional patterns, make sure both sides of your fabric are moving in the same direction. Next, go ahead and take your batting, making sure that it's heat resistant, and you're going to need at least 2 layers. You can also use cotton quilt batting. Just make sure that's not gonna burn your hands or anything and it's nice and thick. Next, I have my contrast fabric. I found this fat quarter also at Walmart, and we're going to start cutting our border or our bias. So laying out your fabric, go ahead and cut into strips 2.5 or 2.25 inches wide. You're going to need probably about 2 strips for this, really not much. You see me here, I'm cutting only 1 inch wide. As I was working with this, I realized it was too small, so I definitely recommend using 2.25 inch bias. That is your standard bias width for a quilt. Once you have those cut out, we're going to go ahead and join our bias pieces together. To do that, take your edges of your bias tape, that I call it, or your fabric, and create a right angle or an L. Doing that, you're going to sew from outside to outside in a diagonal, creating a dog ear. This will create a fold to help the bias lay flat in a seamless transition. Go ahead and take that bias over to the iron and iron your seam open. If you want, you can cut off that excess dog ear fabric. And while you're at it, go ahead and iron that whole thing nice and flat. So there are several ways to connect your bias to your fabric. There's one way I have learned for a quilt, and there's another way I'm about to show you here. What I did here was fold my fabric in half, iron it flat, and then fold those halves in half again to create a quarter to encase the raw edges inside one another. If you are using the standard quilting technique, you really don't have to iron this in half at all. Now we're going to put our pieces together, kind of making a sandwich. Taking 1 piece of fabric right side down with our 2 pieces of batting on top, and a second piece of fabric right side up. Now the size of your batting really doesn't matter, we're going to trim it later anyway, but you really want to focus on making sure your edges match up for your front and back piece of fabric. And then we're going to go ahead and pin that in place. Make sure you have all your edges pinned down, especially your corners, and if you're new to quilting or just want some extra security, you can put some pins in the middle about every inch and a half apart to keep that fabric in place while we sew our grid lines. Now, if we look at our original pot holder, you can see that it has this grid quilted like pattern. I know this pot holder is super dirty, it's really old, hence why I'm making a new one. But these guys are about 1 inch in size each. They're about 1 by 1 squares. So we're going to take that over to our pot holder since we measured the same dimensions when cutting our fabric. So taking your rulers and your water-soluble ink pen, you can also use Taylor's chalk or a different color's ink pen if you have one. Find the middle of the fabric and go ahead and draw a straight line and continue making that grid. Each of these are going to be 1 inch apart. make sure you make your grid lines on both sides of your center line. Okay, now that you have those grid lines drawn on, we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew a standard straight stitch along each line, making sure you do a reverse stitch in the beginning and end of each line. Coming up on the end of the line, I am actually going to go ahead and finish it with a reverse stitch, sewing off of the fabric just a little bit. And instead of cutting my threads and moving over, I'm actually going to daisy chain it and just spin it around, sewing the second line in the opposite direction. Doing this, if you're not pinned in place well, will slide your fabric around and it won't necessarily line up all the way, so be careful if you are daisy chaining. And you can see here are all the grid lines that we drew first in the first direction. Now we're going to go ahead and take it back over to our ruler and draw the grid in the opposite direction again with 1 inch apart lines. And we're going to repeat that process of sewing and daisy chaining those lines. Once we have all that sewn, you can now go ahead and trim your batting. Because of that fabric moving around when we were sewing in opposite directions, you can see I got off center and my batting did move. That is why I left that extra bit. So now that we're finished sewing the grid, we can go ahead and cut that off. Okay, so we pretty much have a pot holder now. We just have to make it pretty. Looking at our original, this is the binding. We're going to go ahead and attach ours. We're also going to make a little hoop or a loop to attach it and hang it up.
So we're going to take the strip we just made, starting, doesn't really matter which side. We're going to want to leave a good tail, about like that. We're going to want to fold it around our edge, keeping our raw edges tucked in.
Definitely slow down and take your time on these corners. Moving too fast, you'll create some wrinkles and some ridges. So to keep it nice and smooth, make sure you slow down and take your time.
Alright, so we got that all. We got all that pinned. We're going to sew as close to the edge as we can, all the way around, leaving this gap. We're going to start and stop about here.
Coming up here, you can see that bias transition that we sewed earlier. With that seamless transition, it blends in super well. Next, we're going to go ahead and continue sewing that bias all the way together, creating a hoop or loop with your excess. Once you have that sewn, go ahead and sew your tails closed and create your loop using the same transition we did before with that right angle and the dog ear. And there we go, there's mine. I did use a zigzag stitch on my dog ear just because I know this is going to stay exposed. If you are using the traditional quilting binding method, this will not be exposed. But there you go. There is your very own pot holder made from scratch, and ours even turned out a little bigger than the original. So let's see these guys in action. Well guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to make a pot holder quick and easy in under half an hour. This makes a great gift idea for all of your cooking friends and family. Make sure you guys subscribe and join the pack, and I will see you in another video. Bye!